Good afternoon, everyone. Well done to those of you who are a bit early. Can everyone hear me? If you're able to type in the chat box. Great. Okay, good. So the sound is working. All right, we'll get going in a few minutes. I saw that there was a question about handouts. I'm going to... I haven't found a way that I can add handouts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send around an email at the end with the slides on them. I'll just have another quick look around here to see if I can share your screen. No, I don't think that it is possible. Okay, just before we get going, a couple of things. I know that last time there was some technical issues. Some people couldn't see the slides. Could everyone give an indication whether they can see the slides or whether they're just seeing me? Yeah, okay, so some people are seeing the slides. Great. Okay, that's a good thing then. That's good. You don't need to hear me at all. Yeah, you don't need to see me, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, some people had an issue with sound. If during the webinar people are saying that, there are a couple of things. One is using Chrome, instead of Internet Explorer. That can help. But then also apparently you guys can see some sort of refresh button. So if you can suggest to people if they have any technical issues on the chat, then that will be that. So just before we get going, what we've been doing so far is if you can just type in your job title, because that's quite useful in terms of knowing who's online and exactly what would be most useful for you. Okay, yeah, so we got some people from the NCA here. Excellent. Border Force, welcome. Social workers, foster carers, guardians, CSE leads, great. Great. Okay, then. So we've got a nice range. At the moment, there's 50 people online, 128 registered. So I'm not going to get going quite yet, just to give the other people an opportunity to log in. Okay, Red Cross. Great. Okay, so loads of different people signing in, which is good, from different places. So I'm just going to put some things on the chat. I'm going to put my email address, also my Twitter handle, just because I'm just trying to keep people up to date with anything related to child trafficking and modern slavery. I'm also going to put up some other links. So got there the website. And then also I'm going to put up just the link to our webinars, just because you can subscribe. So what I don't want to do is keep sending around emails and bombarding people with emails. So if you are interested in finding out about the rest of the webinars, if you can subscribe, then you will be automatically notified. The other thing I'm going to do is put up the link to our the research that I'm going to talk about today. So the link that I've just put up, that's the link to our website where you can download this whole report if you want to. And something else that is not directly related to this topic, but I wanted just to include is the link to the new NRM statistics, which has come out today. So thanks to our colleagues in the NCA who have released those today. I'm not sure if the people on the call are the ones who are responsible for the statistics, but thank you very much for that. So some people have said they can only hear me. If there's, I think there's some sort of refresh button that you might be able to see somewhere on your screen. Sorry that your screen is different to mine, so I don't know exactly where it is. And then if you press that refreshing, then you might be able to see the slides. Okay. Right, I'm just trying to do this a little bit. So I'm not sure if people can see slides now when they couldn't see slides before. Okay. Great. Okay, I think we're going to get going then. The rest of the people, if they're going to join in, then that would be great. Thanks for posting all your job titles. It's very helpful for me to see who is on this call. So just to introduce myself, my name's Phil, and welcome to ECPAT UK's experimental webinars. I don't know how many of you joined on Monday, but this is our second one. I'm hoping it will be a bit more smooth than it was on Monday, but I hope it is useful, and feel free to carry on tuning in for them. Don't worry if you can't see me. You don't need to be able to see me, to be honest. And I don't know why you can't see me compared to on Monday when you could see both the slides and me. Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Phil. I'm the Training and Practice Officer for ECPAT UK. Before that, I was a social worker. I've worked both in child protection and in youth offending. I've also worked for trafficking charities outside of the UK. And yeah, I'm in charge of the training programme that ECPAT UK do. So yeah, let's move on to the next screen. Working now. Okay, so ECPAT UK. The other thing that I'll just mention is that I'm going to try not to look too much at the chat, just because when I did this on Monday, I was reading what everyone was saying and then I was getting confused and losing my train of thought. So I'm going to try and ignore that. It's not because I'm being rude, but it's just so I can try and keep a thread. If you do want to ask questions, there's a separate question part of the webinar, so feel free to put them on there, and then at the end I can do my best to answer the questions. Okay, but I might look over at the chat every so often, but I'm not going to be doing that too much. Okay, so ECPAT UK, we're a very small organisation. We focus solely on the issue of child trafficking and child modern slavery and exploitation. And this today is specifically about some of the research we produced. As well as producing research, we campaign around legislation at all levels of government around any issues with child victims of trafficking or similarly unaccompanied children seeking asylum. As I've already mentioned, we provide training. So we train organisations and professionals in issues of child trafficking and exploitation. So absolutely get in touch with me if you are interested in accessing any of this training. Obviously, the face-to-face training isn't happening at the moment. However, if you let me know you're interested, then when things hopefully will return to some sort of normality, then we can pick that up. As well as that, we have a youth program. So if any of you are based in London and you work with potential child victims of trafficking, you can refer young people to us, and we have a youth program, and we try to provide a wraparound sort of service for these young people. So we make sure that they have advocates, and then we have groups as well for them. So if you are also interested in referring young people, then please let me know. But just to be aware that we only have that capacity within London, and that's not countrywide. Okay, I've just seen that some people are still having technical issues. I'll just remind you again, As well as press and refresh, some people have found either just going onto a phone or a tablet, or instead going onto Chrome instead of Internet Explorer has helped. I was also aware last time that some local authority networks block this website, so that's why some people couldn't see it. Okay, so I'm going to get going then. So, Precarious Journeys. This was the name of our research project. It was conducted, the research was in 2017 and 2018. And we did this in partnership with Anti-Slavery International. So it's not just our research. And we did this really because at the time we had a lot of Vietnamese young people who were coming into our youth program. And yeah, we just we realized that there was very little information really on this kind of experience and the experiences of these young people. So we wanted to conduct this research. So how we did this is that we had several trips to Vietnam, and sorry, I'm still reading the chat. I'm going to try and see if I can avoid it. Okay. So we went to Vietnam several times. We conducted interviews with professionals there, as well as families, to get an understanding on what maybe are some of the push factors in Vietnam. And then, as well as that, we visited lots of different countries within Europe to try and understand their journey and what is happening along their journey. As well as that, obviously, we did in-depth interviews with Vietnamese young people that we worked with. And yeah, again, that's where we got an idea about their experience along the way. So that was the context of the research. We were really surprised, actually, about how much influence this research had. As I said, we are small, but I'm proud to say we do punch way above our weight in terms of research. And I know in particular it was picked up in various places like the Parliament of the Netherlands and other places like that, and was explicitly discussed. And therefore there was some movement because of this report. Okay, so now we're going to go on to Vietnam and the country profile. So what we found is what you have on the screen. First of all, is the provinces where most of the young people and the victims of trafficking were from. Excuse me. So it was mostly the central provinces, but there was a couple in the northeast as well, where there was a high number of young people who were coming from. And what we could sort of see from that was that a big driver over the last couple of years of trafficking was an environmental disaster that happened several years ago. I believe it was a chemical spill in the sea, and what that did is it basically ruined the fishing industry, and livelihoods in these regions were very much focused on fishing. So therefore there was a huge surge in people that didn't have a livelihood, so they were looking to migration as a way to survive. What we could really see in Vietnam was that there is a very strong culture of migration. So the government actively promotes it, and that's because remittances are so important for the gross national income of Vietnam. So you had government-sponsored labour brokers, and even on a community level, sort of there's a strong culture of migration and trying to better yourself and better your family's situation through migration. So we found that that was quite a strong driver of trafficking, because it made people very vulnerable to deception on the part of traffickers to feed them these promises of what could happen. What we also found there is a lot of people think that it's very much about education. We should educate communities about the risks, but actually we didn't find that a lack of awareness was a problem. We found that families were very aware of the risks of undertaken migration in this way, they were aware that lots and lots of people are exploited. However, that didn't seem to change the fact that they wanted to give it a go. I remember in one interview, my colleague was told something along the lines of, I know that this happens to 99 people out of 100, but I'm going to be that one person who's going to succeed from this. So that was something that we were surprised about, and maybe goes against conventional wisdom, that it's all about education and alerting people of the exploitation that could happen. However, there was a lack of awareness about some of the abuse and harm that happens along the way for these people. Excuse me. So I may have already mentioned this. Most of the victims of trafficking were from rural areas. They're from ethnic minority groups. And I put 16 as the age of legal majority. So that's significant in Vietnam, and it may be significant for practitioners there, particularly if I know there's a big issue with age assessments. Every 16-year-old in Vietnam is fingerprinted at their local police station once they're 16. From what I understand, this is done quite systematically, and it's not something which is not really followed through with. It does happen. So that could be a very good baseline for us of when how old a young person is asking when they have been fingerprinted. If they haven't been fingerprinted, then the chances are that they left Vietnam before they were 16 years old. There has been a history of trafficking from Vietnam. Historically, it's been girls who have been trafficked to other parts of Asia for sexual exploitation. That has been the main forms of trafficking. However, what we are seeing increasing over the last decade, maybe 2 decades, is boys being trafficked into Europe. That is something that didn't happen 30 years ago and is a lot more popular now. Anecdotally, when I'm working with local authorities in various different parts of the country, recently there has been an increase in the number of Vietnamese girls who have been presenting to services. I'm not sure if that is something that is seen commonly, but I have seen it or heard about it in a couple of places as well. And then the last thing about Vietnam, again, is just emphasizing the recruitment is done through social media, but also labor brokers. And a lot of these are government sponsored, or at least government regulated labor brokers who are facilitating the trafficking. And again, they're significant in the way that they're incredibly local, which matters in terms of the coercion and control that the young people then face once they are in Europe, because the people on the other side in Vietnam have a very, very easy link into these people's families and these communities. So that is a very powerful way of control. Okay, I'm just going to quickly look on the chat, see if there's any burning questions or discussions. No. Okay. Feel free to comment and contribute to anything that I've said. I might not necessarily read it, but others may be able to. Okay, so next thing, now what is on the screen is the route. So this is the route that we saw most commonly. What was happening is that they would exit through Vietnam into China, and then in China, they would get fake documents. And these fake documents usually were of adults, because adults traveling has a lot less scrutiny compared to children traveling. So what was happening is that children were being trafficked across the border into China, and then they would pick up adult documents. And then what we saw is that they would often fly into Russia with a tourist visa. And then once they were in Russia, they would make an overland journey into Europe, as you can see on the screen. We did see that there was some recycling. So as you see in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, there was some recycling happening. And again, this was when we were interviewing young people. They seemed to sort of circle around between the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and France before coming into the UK. As well as the route that you see on the screen, there was also some people who were directly trafficked, and they were directly flown into either the Netherlands or France. And again, they were either on a connecting flight to somewhere else, not in Europe, but they would on purpose miss their connection flight. They would wait in the airport for a couple of days, and then they would present themselves to authorities. And then at that point is that they would be taken out of the airport, often into police custody or going into children's services custody. And then they would be told to run away and find themselves at the nearest town centre, and they would make sure that they would get picked up, really. Their transport would be arranged. So that was something we heard. And another emerging route has been through South America. So they're flying into South America, and then from South America, they're flying into Europe. And again, that was just something, it's an unusual route which wasn't thought of before. And that was a way to try and avoid scrutiny from on the traffickers' side of who they were bringing in. So we did see various different routes. We expect that this is going to change, and it's always changing. Something that we have been told to keep an eye out of, because we're suspecting it could be happening, is trafficking routes through Ireland, into Northern Ireland, and then into the United Kingdom. This is something that we haven't seen yet, but it's possibly happening. So yeah, it's watch this space. And what you see on the screen is not the only route, and it is probably going to be changing at some point. I can see that there was a question about routes via Greece. In terms of our Vietnamese young people, we didn't come across any routes in Greece. We very much saw it as the Northern European route, and not the route through Southern Europe and the Mediterranean. However, that's absolutely, yeah, I'm not surprised to think that it would be routes through Greece as well. Okay, so just looking a little bit more in depth at the journey then, is what you can see on the screen is just some of it is about transport, and some of it is about exploitation that happened along the way. So starting in Russia, we saw that there was a lot of labor exploitation, and for both construction and textile work. And then they would often be walking across over borders, but sometimes this was through lorries. And essentially at every point in the journey, they would be made to pay, so to speak, for their next part of the journey, and that was through exploitation. So you saw, and then when you carry on going further, so in Poland, we were aware of nail bar labor exploitation, the same in Germany. And then Netherlands, we also saw nail bar exploitation, but that's also cannabis cultivation came up there. You can also see cannabis cultivation happening in Czech Republic, but something that started to emerge during this research was that instead of just cannabis cultivation in the Czech Republic, they saw methamphetamine cultivation by trafficked young people. So we're not sure whether this has got to the UK yet. It's possible that this could be happening. I know that, again, anecdotally, it appears that the Vietnamese organised crime groups in the UK haven't got the same hold over the cannabis market as maybe they once did. So that's my wondering, is whether this trend of methamphetamine production is also happening in other parts of Europe instead of just the Czech Republic. And then, it was a ferry journey from mainland Europe, either France, Belgium, or the Netherlands. That it was how they entered the UK as well. Can't see the explanation for light blue circle. Okay, sorry, I've just looked on the chat. The light blue is just the ferry crossings. So that's one of the modes of transport, and that was ferry crossings into the UK. Okay, was that everything that we wanted to say? Yeah, really, what we were not necessarily surprised about, but what came very clear in this journey is in this research is that exploitation is not just happening at the start or at the end of a journey, but is happening at every single stage in the journey. We were hearing regular reports and disclosures of sexual abuse and violence being used against these children at pretty much every stage. So in Russia, in Belarus, Poland, at every point we were hearing disclosures of abuse. And again, this comes from one of the recommendations that we had came across at the end, was that transit countries really need to stop seeing this as a problem at the start and at the end of a trafficking route, but actually exploitation is happening in transit and exploitation is happening on their turf, essentially. And this is something that I think wasn't particularly considered in transit countries before this. Okay, so in terms of what's happening in the UK and just some issues. So cannabis cultivation and nail bar labour is generally where we see most young people become exploited. And as well, it's not one or the other and just these two. We can see that there's a lot of recycling, and part of the method of control is constantly moving people. So moving people between cannabis grows, moving people from cannabis grows to nail bars. And again, it's not just about the labor exploitation there. So they may be working in the nail bar in the day, but at the night there's sexual exploitation which is happening of these children upstairs in the flat above the nail bar shop. So it's not just one, it's not just the other, and it's it's all mixed in together. So just some challenges that we have for Vietnamese young people. I know a lot of this will be familiar to some of you, and you would have. We are slowly getting better at. We're recognizing these people who are being exploited as victims instead of criminals, but we're still not there really. I did a training for the youth custody service a few months ago, and I mentioned something about cannabis grows, and I said, thankfully, we're now slowly getting to a position where if the police see a child in a Vietnamese child in a cannabis grow, they're thinking of this person as a child and a victim. However, that's not always happening. So they said just 2 days ago, one of the young offenders institutions in the country had a young person who has been charged and is currently on remand for cannabis cultivation. So it is getting better, but we're still not there. And Vietnamese young people who have been exploited are still being criminalized for what they're doing. If you're interested in the criminalization of victims of trafficking, on Monday, I'm going to be doing a webinar on the Section 45 statutory defence. So that looks at non-prosecution for these victims who have needed to commit crimes as part of their exploitation. So sign into that if you would be interested in that. And then what we also see is high rates of missing for Vietnamese young people. Another one of the webinars I'm going to do next week is introducing our research on missing from care of child victims of trafficking. And what we saw is that if we broke down the missing rates by ethnicity or by nationality, we saw that Vietnamese young people were far more likely to go missing than any other any other nationality of young person. What you also see with Vietnamese young people is that we are also not very good at getting them back at all. So disproportionately, we're more likely to have them go missing long term, and we're also more likely to have never come across them again once they do go missing. We're going to talk a little bit more about the coercion and control in the next slide, but that is very much linked to this missing from care. And what I've already said is that these victims, they've been drilled into them that as soon as they're in the care of an authority, you escape, and you go to the middle of the town. Wherever you are, you find the town centre, and from there, the traffickers will arrange for them to be picked up again. So it's drilled into them at every stage. You escape and you find the town centre. You escape and you find the town centre. We see a big problem with Vietnamese young people getting age disputed. I'm not going to go into age disputes here because it will take too long, but all I will say is that make sure if you're dealing with these cases, you are aware of the case law around age assessment, age assessing young people and giving children the benefit of the doubt. So unless you have incontrovertible evidence that they are an adult, then you must treat them as a child until that incontrovertible evidence is there. So there's plenty of case law around age disputes that I'm not going to go into, but it is a problem, and we have supported lots of young people who ended up being considered an adult because they had fake Chinese documents saying they were an adult or something similar. They moved into adult accommodation, they were pregnant, and then by the time that we were able to support them in getting the evidence that they were a child and that was accepted, they were pregnant and they were really struggling, really, because of what happened when they were in adult care. So yeah, that's all we'd say, is that it is a big problem for our young people. It also contributes to the missing from care. When young people feel they are not being believed by authorities, they will run away. And again, linked to the missing is the high risk of re-trafficking. We see this time and time again with Vietnamese young people, is that the hold of the traffickers over them is so strong, and re-trafficking happens very, very easily with Vietnamese young people. And finally, we do see a lot of Vietnamese young people with health problems. Just to be aware that if you are working with these young people, make sure that they have their looked after review medical checkups, and they are properly done. Hepatitis is very common in this group of young people, and they do need a lot of health support. Okay. I've just seen a question, are the figures national or missing from care? Yes, so that research that we did into children missing from care, we did freedom of information requests for every single local authority in the country, and then we compiled our data based on that. So not every single local authority did answer, but it was a pretty comprehensive piece of research. I've just seen a question. I was wondering if you could give any more details on the process of recruitment. So most of these young people, debt bondage was used. Labour brokers, or whoever were posing, the traffickers posing as labour brokers and other sort of employment specialists, they would be they would approach people's homes. They usually come to people's homes, they'd meet people in the street, and they'd offer opportunities for employment abroad. Something else which is very, very common with this group of young people is debt bondage. So families would enter debt bondage to get young people to pay for this journey. And again, because of this strong culture of migration, there wasn't too much sort of persuasion that needed to happen by the people who are recruiting them, but instead it's just a deception. They're being untruthful about the employment opportunities, and often that is enough for a young person to agree to go. And then the debt bondage is one of the main ways where control continues. And as I said, these labor brokers are based very, very locally in the village of origin or the town of origin, which means that they can go and see the family regularly. They often will be giving the family grief if the young person is not earning enough money, or that sort of thing as well. I've seen a question in relation to, is the stats in relation to England rather than the UK? The missing from care stats, I believe it was all local authorities in the UK. It was certainly England and Wales, but I'm not 100% sure. But I can check that by the, before next week when we do the missing in care research. Okay. Okay, so I've kind of already looked at this already, but the methods of control for these Vietnamese young people, there seems to be a particular challenge for breaking the relationship between the victim and the person who's trafficking them. I've mentioned the debt bondage. The people controlling and exploiting the children encourage this contact between the family and the young person, because the family will be so worried about paying back the debt that they're encouraging the child to do whatever they can to whatever's asked of them, basically, because they're so worried about the debt. We could also hear what these young people were told about professionals and the authorities and the state in Europe. So it was quite extreme, really, what we'd hear in terms of what they were told about what the police will do to them. They were told about what happens when someone sees a social worker. They were told all these terrible things about being in care. And all these kind of things meant that the victims of trafficking were so afraid of authorities, and we would often play into their hands. So they were told about being incarcerated and being put in prison for a very, very long time. And then what happens is the first time that they come into contact with authorities is the police, and the police end up arresting them. So immediately they get this impression that what has been told about the police is true, even though it's not. So that was very, very strong, and it takes a long time to sort of break this distrust that young people have for authorities here. There was lots of use of violence and sexual violence as well. There was lots of threats to family back home, and this was, again, something used a lot to control young people. And then the lack of documents and knowledge. So the young people were told that they committed a crime by being smuggled into the UK. So they believed that they were being smuggled, but actually they were being trafficked. The key difference is that they thought that they had committed a criminal offence when they were actually the ones being exploited. But what that means is that they are a lot less likely to seek help to escape, and they're much more likely to feel like the trafficker has total control over them. Something else was that the knowledge. So young people did not know where they were. They would mostly know that they were in the UK, although that didn't always happen. But yeah, they just didn't know where they were, and they were moved so regularly that, again, that is a way of controlling the young person, is that they feel totally powerless and they're totally dependent on the people who are trafficking them. And then something that's come out up in particular with Vietnamese young people is hidden SIM cards and slips of paper that are found on these young people when they are picked up by the police or others. So what we're really encouraging is making sure that if a young person has been found, they're at the police station, that everything is checked properly. So there's no pocket litter, there's no tiny slips of paper with phone numbers on, checking every part of their possessions to make sure there's no SIM cards. Often there's several SIM cards on the back of the phone battery, I've been told. So it's something that we now understand better and we are getting better at, but we just need to find out how they stay in communication with these young people. I've also heard of one occasion where the seam of a jumper and the young person just cut it open and used that SIM card to call the people who are trafficking him. And then what's come up several times, most recently I've seen it in a serious case review, was social media communication. So a young person may go to get into foster care and then they're going on their iPad and then straight away they're on Facebook and they're communicating with the person who's trafficked them. And that has caused them to go missing within a few hours, and then they've gone again, and we've lost where they are, most likely back with the people who have trafficked them. So I've just seen a question. Did young people give any indication of what changed their view of professionals, help them gain trust, or make disclosures? This is really difficult. I think what we have heard from young people is that it's something that can only be built over time. So young people need to have time to see that professionals are caring. They need time to show that professionals keep their promises and they do what they say they're going to say, because over time then that they can see that what they've been told is not true, and they've can see that professionals around them are there for their own welfare. So it's not easy to do at all, but we need to earn the trust. It's a lot harder to earn their trust than maybe it is to earn trust of other young people. So maybe just looking a bit broader, that was more practice implications of what we can see for professionals. But when we did this research, we did have some recommendations for policy. So as I've already mentioned, transit countries, to consider Vietnamese child victims of trafficking as their responsibility and not just the responsibility of the destination and origin countries. This appears to have changed a little bit now. What we have been pleased about is that we've had law enforcement in the Netherlands reach out to us and have helped us. So that's just an example of law enforcement in recent months and years who have taken these offences and this exploitation in their own country as much more seriously. What we also saw throughout Europe was this idea, probably stereotype, that the Vietnamese community is very closed off, very insulated. And what we kind of saw from that is actually there wasn't too much attempt to engage with the Vietnamese community. Through the research, we saw that the Vietnamese community could definitely be a strength. So we found various different Facebook pages and groups across Europe, and it was people asking about jobs and asking whether this labor broker or this person is true. And there are plenty of people from the Vietnamese community there warning people and trying to support people. But obviously, at the same time, it was people within the Vietnamese community who are trafficking them. So our message really is that state authorities shouldn't just assume that the Vietnamese community is insulated and doesn't want to engage, because you're missing a huge opportunity to try and protect these children, and it's just sort of quite a lazy assumption to have. And then finally, the rigid immigration environment is exacerbating the problem of trafficking, really. It leaves children very vulnerable to being trafficked in the first place, but also when you speak to these young people, the pressure that they have when they're here with the asylum case, the criminal cases, age assessments, all these kind of processes are very unfriendly to children. They are often very traumatic. It just makes the draw of the trafficker so much more powerful, because they may be trying to resist the power of the trafficker, but actually they're thinking, what's the point in trying to resist this when no one here believes me, when I might go to jail? All these kind of things are going through young people's minds. So it's certainly leading to trafficking, but it's also leading to re-trafficking. Okay, so at this point, I almost forgot, I'm just going to show a video, and this video was made at the same time of this research as well. No, it did work yesterday. Can everyone see the video?
My name is Harry. I'm 15 years old. I was born in a little village. My grandparents raised me. I needed to go out and get a job, but there wasn't any work in our village. Then one day this man came. He said he had work for me abroad, that I could send money home. It was like a dream come true. On the way to the airport, the man told me he needed to pick up one more boy from the city. He said the boy was very good in the music. He said he was going to give him education. That when I saw my friend Han for the first time. The man said he would get us visas, and he paid for our trip and everything. We thought he was so kind. Then, when we arrived in the UK, the man took us to a big house in a city. He told us we had to take care of his plans. He said we owe him money if we didn't do it, or if we ran away, he'd kill us. My friend was crying all the time. We felt sick with the smell, and were not allowed out on our own. The man and his friend never gave us no money. One day the police came and arrested us for growing drugs. I didn't understand what was happening. That was the last time I saw my friend Tang. After his arrest, my friend went to stay with foster parents, but he went missing after. For me, they say I am lying about my age and I am criminal. I am scared the man and his gang will find me and want more money. I am scared I go to prison. Why does nobody believe me?
Right. Okay. So at this point, I would just say feel free to ask some questions. I've seen a few questions down, which I'll answer in a minute, but I'll give you a chance just to write some questions. At this point, just wanted to mention some other things. So as I said, I'm in charge of the training. Please get in touch with me if you're interested in commissioning our training as an organization, or if as an individual you'd be interested in accessing our training, which happens in central London. So yeah, we can train any organization and tailor it to you. Please feel free to get in touch. We do have various different courses. The main ones are on the screen right now. So yeah, get in touch if that's you. We have more of these webinars. So our next one is on Monday. And then what's going to happen is every day next week, we're going to do another another one every single day next week. So that's the ones I've got planned so far. If you've got a suggestion on a very specific topic that you'd like covered, then let me know. I will do one next Thursday, but I'm not 100% sure what I'll do it on yet. And then just going on that, really, after next week, we're not going to be doing any more webinars. The reason why is because this is a difficult financial time for our organization, and we're going to be making sure that our essential services to young people and victims of trafficking is not compromised. So because of that, I'm non-essential staff and I will be furloughed for the time being. So what that means is after next week, I'm not going to be available for the foreseeable future until training can continue. But anyone can access these webinars after next week because the recording will be on the same link. So absolutely not expecting everyone to want to tune in to every single one of these next week, but in the coming weeks you can log on at any time and listen to the recording of it. There are other things I wanted to mention as well. Yes, this is very experimental for us, these webinars. This is only the second one that we've done. So we're really interested in just knowing what you think of them. I've just put on a SurveyMonkey link. If you could please answer it. It's really quick. The average time it took someone was 3 minutes and 8 seconds. So it won't take too much of your time, but it'll be really helpful for you, for us to know what you think. I will just put up the link again to subscribe to any of our webinars, and I'll send this in an email anyway. Most of you should be able to find it anyway. And then finally, just one thing that I'm going to put up is this link. We were very keen to make these webinars free of charge. However, we would absolutely welcome some donations. We had to buy a lot bigger package to do these webinars because we were so surprised about how popular they were. But we're just asking if you are able to donate £5 per webinar you watch. That would make a huge difference for us being able to support our young people at this time. So now I'm going to go and answer some of the questions. The first one that I've seen is that someone who has logged in on was actively part of this research, and she wanted to clarify that most victims of trafficking were not from an ethnic minority, but actually from the ethnic majority in Vietnam. I do have that in my notes, so I'm not sure where I got that from. I think I have heard, thinking about it, that more recent victims of trafficking who have been identified have come more from the south of Vietnam, and they may have been an ethnic minority group. Any other questions? So I've seen a question about what impact has the lorry incident had, Essex lorry incident had on trafficking of Vietnamese nationals. So after that tragedy, I think there has been certainly far more awareness, which has been really welcome. As an example of what I said, is that different countries have who are involved in the transit of trafficked victims have become a lot more alert after what happened, and maybe looking to take responsibility about how they can try and stop these things. We're not entirely sure what this impact has had. It's possible. What we did see for some time straight after is that trafficking of these young people did go. We stopped seeing people present for some time. So that's possible. It's possible that that has actually almost put a hold on some trafficking. However, we absolutely still know that there are plenty of Vietnamese nationals who are presenting who look like they have been trafficked. I think in terms of what the impact has had, it may be some time before we know some of that. Okay, it's often assumed that sexual exploitation relates to females. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I should have probably said this. Almost all of the disclosures from of sexual exploitation that we had were actually of boys. So these were boys saying that they were sexually exploited, not just girls. That was something that we were particularly surprised about. We do know that sexual exploitation of boys does happen, but we were surprised that we were getting these disclosures, and also the amount of disclosures that we had. I've been reminded very usefully of Bernardo's ICTIC service, the Independent Child Trafficking Guardian Service. This is one of our key campaigns as a charity, is that we are really pushing for the ICTIC service to be properly resourced and rolled out nationwide. They are an excellent resource, so please do a little bit of research and have a look at whether the ICTIC service is available in your local authority. And then if that's the case, then please refer your young people, and not just Vietnamese young people who you think might have been trafficked, but any young person who you think might have been trafficked. Okay, I've just been asked a quick question about the spiritual abuse and trafficking session. So that will be very much an introduction into spiritual abuse and trafficking. It's just going to be 45 minutes, whereas normally we have a whole day's training on it. What we're going to look at is, I'm just going to focus on just giving some background of it. So what do we mean by spiritual abuse? Just tackle some of the common misconceptions, and then just explain a little bit about what we've seen of the particular relationship between spiritual abuse and trafficking, because spiritual abuse is present in lots of types of exploitation and abuse, but in particular it seems to have some sort of particular relationship with trafficking. So that's something that we would talk about. So I'm just going to look at some of these questions that have happened on the chat. So we've just had someone mention how COVID-19 will disrupt travel in and out of Vietnam. So yeah, I think it is absolutely likely that we're going to see maybe a reduction in trafficked young people, just because there's a general less movement of people across the world. Just trying to read some of these other ones. So there's a question about whether we will do a webinar in the future about county lines. Possibly. We're not going to do one next week, so we'd have to wait until I'm back from furlough. We do cover county lines as part of our child criminal exploitation training. The message that we would like to get across is this idea of county lines. We've been reporting on this kind of exploitation of young people for decades. It looks slightly different now. So we just definitely want to emphasize that for these county line cases of exploitation is not something that's new, and it's been happening for a long time. But yeah, that sounds good. So a question about any indication yet of what's happening for victims in the UK as a consequence of COVID-19, for an example, closures such as nail bars. I don't know. We can speculate, but we're not in a position where we can research this. We're not in a position where we can say really, because it's still currently happening, instead of something which we can look back on and maybe see what's happening. What I would say is that generally there's a increasing trend for traffickers to use the local authorities. So, they see it as a free way that they can reduce their costs, because these local authorities will house young people. So, my expectation is that if there's no way that these young people will be exploited, they'll probably be ordered to go and present at local authorities, because the traffickers at that time have no use for them. They're not earning any money. So why don't we just let the local authority pay for them? And then when we need them again, we'll get in contact with them, and then the exploitation will start again. There's a question about how old these young people are. Generally, we rarely see young people younger than 16. However, we are aware of younger children, 15-year-olds, but we're also aware that some young people are leaving Vietnam maybe when they're 14, but that by the time that they get to the UK, they might be 15 or 16 years old. Okay, someone is interested in the webinars next week. I think I have some of these links here. If I don't have, I have the link for the one for Monday, but you should be able to find all of it online, but I'm going to send an email anyway. Okay. Thank you very much all for joining. Feel free to stay online and ask any more questions if there are any more, but I'm not sure I can see any more questions. Sorry if I've missed them. Feel free to get in touch. But apart from that, if you want any more questions, please stay. If you're able to fill out our survey, that would be really helpful. If you want to know more, go to our website, download the report. While you're at it, if you want to join some of our campaigns around stable futures and a rollout of the ICTIC service, petitions are online. So please feel free to look there. If you're interested in training, please get in touch. And apart from that, I will probably see some of you next week. Oh, I've just seen a question about debt bondage. So it's a complicated issue. And we've seen different practice in different ways. People often disagree with this, but we have seen some local authorities who have allowed some of a young person's weekly allowance to be remitted back home to their family. And then that really helps in terms of paying back the family debt. Okay. I totally understand how people disagree with this, but what we saw, or what the opinion is around that, is that it's taken pressure off young people. It's making the family less likely to pressure the young person to run away and find a job. So the local authority kind of feel like it's linked to less lower missing from care numbers. Something else which I know people have often said it needs to be done is that if we've got an impression that the family is pressuring the young person and facilitating the exploitation and trafficking, we do know of occasions where young people are not allowed to contact their family just because of a protection issue. And we actually think that there's a direct link between contact with family when the family pressure the young person to run away and then the young person not going again. But I mean, what I would say is that yeah, it's really difficult with the debt bondage as well. It's a pressure that young people really feel, and they really feel strongly. And sometimes it might be facilitating a young person getting non-exploitative employment when they're slightly older, or it's facilitating remittances, or it might just be a severing of contact to try and prevent the young person feeling pressure. I've just seen a question, and we have an author of the Child C Serious Case Review, which is very really interesting to have. That is a very pertinent serious case review. And he says, I made a number of recommendations about changes to child protection procedures which are not designed for trafficked children. Yes, I do agree. We need a way to be a bit more to have a bit more of a tailored and immediate safeguarding response for child victims of trafficking. The difficulty with a lot of child protection procedures is that they are quite general and they have to cover all sorts of safeguarding issues. And in some of those procedures in specific trafficking cases can support re-trafficking. It can encourage and support traffickers, and it can it can be counterproductive. So thank you for that. I can't see any more questions, but I'm going to keep looking. But feel free to leave as you wish. Okay, so I've had someone who's answered a little bit about what's happening since the lorry incident last year, who reports that Vietnamese young people coming into France has gone down a lot since the Essex incident. Okay, so very interesting conversations here. Thank you very much for your contribution. I've just had a question. Any issues with Vietnamese interpreters? We see issues with interpreters of all nationalities. Two issues we see. One is of the quality of interpreter. So we are aware of prosecutions for trafficking offences which have either been paused or collapsed because the interpreter in police interviews, which may have had to be sought on short notice in the middle of the night, has interpreted a police interview, and then an interpreter in court has tried to interpret and translate the interview, and they've been said in court that's not what that person has said, that's not accurate. It's not specifically a problem for Vietnamese interpreters, it's a problem for interpreters in general. And then the other thing that we need to be alert with, which we don't necessarily have any evidence for, is any sort of coordination or cooperation between interpreters and people who are exploiting and trafficking them. So this might not just be an issue for interpreters, but also legal representatives and solicitors. So we need to be alert to issues that interpreters could be facilitating any exploitation, but we don't have evidence of this happening. Okay, I cannot see any more questions now, and I've seen most people have gone, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining. I look forward to seeing more of you potentially next week if you are interested in some of the other webinars that we're running. So thanks very much.